Midnight inspections aren't in the bylaws, Patricia Holloway sneered, her clipboard tapping against my garage door like a judge's gavel. She didn't ask permission. She didn't even look at me as she announced, "We'll force entry if you don't comply." This structure is a hazard to the neighborhood. Her smirk told me she'd already decided the verdict. Funny thing about hazards, I said quietly, stepping into the porch light. I wrote the safety protocols the city uses to define them. For the first time, Patricia blinked. Just a flicker, but enough to let me know the ground beneath her wasn't as solid as she thought. If you've ever felt that surge of power when standing up to bullies, hit subscribe now. This showdown is about to become a masterclass in fighting back. My name's Daniel Mercer, I said evenly. Structural engineer. Every beam, every load, every lock in this house is stronger than the one you're standing in. My father built this place with his own hands, and I intend to protect what's inside. You think you've cornered me, but you're leaning against the wrong wall. I looked at the garage door and felt the air tighten in my chest. Behind that steel barrier sat my father's motorcycle, the one we restored together during his last summer alive. He'd taught me to trace cracks with my fingertips, to listen for flaws in steel like a doctor hearing a heartbeat. He died before we could take it out on the open road, and since then, that machine has been more than a collection of parts. It's the last piece of him I have left. Patricia called it clutter. To me, it was memory forged into metal. This wasn't just about fines or bylaws. It wasn't about her endless violations taped to my door like threats dressed in legalese. This was about erasure. Patricia wanted to strip my father's legacy down to nothing but an entry in her violation ledger, and that I couldn't allow. The night air carried the scent of cut grass and engine oil, and I knew in that moment this fight was never going to stay on paper. It was going to test everything I'd built, everything I'd learned, and everything I still owed to a man who could no longer defend his work. The tension still clung to me long after Patricia retreated into the night, her heels snapping against the pavement like gunshots echoing down Willow Creek's quiet lanes. I didn't go back inside. Instead, I stood at the edge of the cul-de-sac, scanning the neat rows of brick homes lit by security lamps. Behind those windows were families who had no idea what had just happened, or worse, families too afraid to speak out. The silence was its own kind of indictment. By morning, the neighborhood pool became the stage for her next move. Patricia stood at the shallow end, with her clipboard raised like a sword, handing out violation slips to anyone who lingered too long in conversation. Parents shepherded their kids away, pretending not to notice her. It was theater, and she loved every second of it. I leaned against the gate, arms crossed, watching as she delivered her latest decree, a mandatory garage inspection for safety compliance. The announcement rippled across the crowd. A few whispered, a few shook their heads, but none stepped forward. Patricia's smile widened. This was how she won, through intimidation and exhaustion. "Your garages are not your fortresses," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "If one structure is compromised, we all suffer the liability. Don't let selfishness destroy our community." Her eyes locked on me as she spoke the last word, dragging it out like an accusation. I didn't flinch. My professional instinct kicked in, cataloging everything wrong with her statement. Liability? She had no legal grounds to declare private garages communal hazards without documented inspection authority. And even then, inspections required consent or municipal oversight. She wasn't just stretching her power, she was inventing it. The parents who'd stayed exchanged uneasy glances. I caught Greg Salazar's gaze near the diving board. He shifted uncomfortably, clutching a folder against his chest. Greg was new to the board, a young father with 2 kids splashing in the water. He looked like he wanted to say something, but Patricia's shadow kept him silent. I let the moment hang before stepping through the gate. "Funny," I said, voice calm but carrying. "I wrote structural assessments for half the schools in this district. Not once did I need a midnight break-in to prove a building was safe." A murmur rippled through the small crowd. Patricia's cheeks flushed crimson. She recovered quickly, jabbing her clipboard toward me. "Mr. Mercer, your sarcasm won't distract us from the truth. Your garage is a liability. Until it's inspected, every family here is at risk. The board has the right—" "No," I cut in, firm but steady. "The board doesn't have that right, and you know it." The words landed like a crack in glass. People shifted closer, curiosity outweighing their fear. For the first time, she wasn't just confronting me in the dark. She was trying to dominate the community under daylight, and her mask was slipping. Greg took a small step forward, then stopped. His hesitation spoke volumes. I recognized that look. I'd worn it once myself, back when I was a junior engineer, pressured to sign off on faulty designs. It was the look of someone torn between survival and truth. He wasn't ready yet, but I knew he would be. Patricia huffed and stormed off, tossing her clipboard into her tote bag. The crowd dissolved, muttering under their breath. I didn't chase her. I didn't need to. Today she'd tried to weaponize fear, and for the first time, cracks had formed in her control. Walking back home, I passed the trimmed hedges and spotless driveways of Willow Creek Estates. On the surface, everything looked perfect, but perfection hides rot. I knew how weak beams buckle under pressure, how hairline fractures spread until collapse is inevitable. Patricia's rule was built the same way, polished on the outside, unsound at the core. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with the blueprints of Willow Creek still spread across my laptop. Not just my house, but the whole community layout. Easements, fire codes, load requirements. I saw patterns Patricia never anticipated, weak points in her authority, hidden in plain sight. She wasn't just wrong morally. She was wrong legally, structurally, and technically. The realization settled over me with a quiet certainty. She wasn't fighting me alone. She was fighting the truth itself, and truth once exposed doesn't bend. It breaks. The glow from my laptop dimmed as the night deepened, but my mind was sharper than ever. Patricia had made her play at the pool, and though she strutted away with false confidence, the shift in the crowd told a different story. Still, one detail clung to me more than the rest. Greg Salazar, standing at the diving board, folder pressed to his chest like armor. His silence had been deafening. The next morning, the HOA office became my battlefield. It wasn't much more than a rented suite above a strip of medical practices, but inside, it smelled of cold coffee and copier toner. A corkboard lined with notices hung crooked on the wall, each one stamped with Patricia's signature flourish. Behind the front desk, Greg sat hunched over paperwork, his shoulders rounded, his pen scratching with uneven rhythm. When he saw me walk in, his posture stiffened. He didn't look up right away, but the way his hand paused mid-signature betrayed his nerves. He adjusted his glasses unnecessarily, then fiddled with a stack of violation forms, shuffling them twice before setting them back in the exact same place. I didn't need him to speak. His body told the story. This was a man caught between truth and fear, trying to make himself small in a place that demanded complicity. Patricia's office door creaked open, and her heels clicked against the linoleum. She carried herself like a queen surveying her court, eyes sweeping past me before landing on Greg. "The Mercer file," she demanded. Greg flinched, nearly dropping his pen, then passed the folder with both hands as though it were contraband. He kept his gaze fixed on the desk. Her smile was thin as she glanced at me. "Mr. Mercer? Here to submit your inspection consent form, I assume?" I didn't answer her bait. My attention stayed on Greg. His knuckles whitened as he clutched the edge of the desk, jaw tight enough to tremble. He wanted to say something. I could see it in the way his lips parted, then closed again, like words suffocated before birth. Patricia strutted back into her office, door slamming shut behind her. The echo rattled Greg more than it rattled me. His foot tapped a nervous rhythm against the floor, and he rubbed, his temple as if trying to erase the weight of what he'd just witnessed. "Greg," I said quietly, leaning closer, "you know she's overstepping. You know it doesn't hold." He froze. His eyes darted toward the closed office door, then back to me. His shoulders rose defensively, as if bracing for impact. But he didn't deny it. He didn't even try. Instead, he shuffled papers again, buying time, betraying his turmoil with every unnecessary movement. I recognized that battle. Fear on one side, conscience on the other. It lived in his hunched posture, in the way his breath caught when Patricia's voice carried from behind the door. He wanted to resist. He just didn't know how to survive the fallout. I didn't push him further, not yet. Timing mattered as much in human conflicts as in structural design. You can't force a weak beam to carry weight. It has to be reinforced first. As I left the office, I caught one last glimpse of him. His fingers drummed against the desk in a frantic rhythm, eyes unfocused, as though his mind was replaying the poolside scene. He'd seen her abuse of power. He'd seen the cracks forming, and he'd seen that someone was willing to stand against her. The HOA office door closed behind me, but the image stayed. Greg was more than a silent bystander. He was the hinge on which Patricia's authority could swing open or snap shut. His silence was temporary. His body language had already confessed what his words could not. Walking back into the morning sun, I felt the pressure of the fight settling deeper into my bones. Patricia thought she could isolate me. But every bully forgets one truth. Silence doesn't equal loyalty. Sometimes it's the sound of courage gathering strength. The morning sun felt sharp against my skin as I left the HOA office, its heat cutting through the lingering chill of what I'd just seen. Greg's nervous hands, his darting eyes, his silence. It all played on repeat in my head. He was trapped, but not beyond reach. Patricia, however, thrived on that fear, and I knew she wouldn't waste any time escalating. By dusk, her escalation arrived. She had chosen the community park for her next spectacle, a space meant for kids' soccer games and weekend picnics. Tonight, though, it had become her stage. A banner stretched across the gazebo read "Safety Meeting," though no one mistook it for anything but a tribunal. Residents gathered in lawn chairs and stood along the walking path, whispering among themselves as Patricia mounted the steps with her clipboard. She didn't waste time. "We've identified multiple properties at risk of structural hazard," she announced, voice carrying through the park's speakers. "These violations threaten our insurance, our safety, and our values. The board will begin mandatory inspections this week." She paused for dramatic effect before adding, "Non-compliance will result in fines and possible legal action." Her gaze swept across the crowd until it found me near the back. The emphasis in her words was deliberate, a warning dressed as policy. My stomach tightened, but not from fear, from fury. Her language wasn't just intimidation. It was legally unsound. As an engineer, I knew the codes and requirements. HOA authority stopped at aesthetics and agreed common areas. Structural safety required municipal jurisdiction, not self-appointed overlords with clipboards. Patricia was bluffing with high stakes, gambling on silence. Neighbors shifted uneasily, some whispering, others staring at the ground. I caught sight of Greg again, standing off to the side. His arms were crossed, but his shoulders sagged, like a man torn in half. Every time Patricia thundered a threat, his jaw tightened. When she declared legal action, his head lowered as though ashamed to be part of it. I stepped forward, forcing my voice into the open. "Legal action requires standing, Patricia, and this board has none. You can't strong-arm your neighbors with threats that hold no weight in law." The air shifted, murmurs spread through the crowd. Patricia's eyes narrowed, her smile thinning into something brittle. "Mr. Mercer," she said sweetly, "your opinions are noted. But we all know your garage is the real danger here. Would you like to confess to your neighbors what you've been hiding?" The crowd tensed. All eyes turned to me. This was her trap: paint me as a selfish, reckless outlier and turn the neighborhood against me. I lifted my chin. "What I've been hiding," I said slowly, "is that my garage has already been inspected. By me. A licensed structural engineer. I designed safer buildings for this county than any clipboard threat could protect. And I can prove it." A ripple of shock passed through the assembly. People leaned closer, whispering my credentials under their breath. Patricia's face flushed, but she doubled down, gripping the podium. "Credentials don't excuse noncompliance. This community requires unity, not arrogance." I could feel the tide shifting, just slightly. The words "licensed engineer" carried more weight than her repeated threats. Neighbors glanced at each other, some nodding, others biting their lips. For the first time, doubt edged into their faces. Not about me, but about her. Greg stood frozen near the path, his fingers gripping his folder so tightly the paper bent under the strain. His body screamed conflict. Feet pointed toward me, but shoulders angled toward Patricia, as if he couldn't choose which direction to turn. His silence was louder than any speech he could have given. Patricia ended the meeting abruptly, retreating from the gazebo with clipped words about follow-up notices. The crowd dispersed slowly, buzzing with new questions she hadn't meant to spark. As I walked home past the park benches and fading lamplight, the outlines of my father's motorcycle filled my mind again. Patricia thought intimidation would bend me, that the crowd would cave, and Greg would stay silent forever. But buildings fail when pressure exceeds design limits, and Patricia was piling on too much, too fast. The cracks in her authority weren't just showing, they were spreading. The night after the park meeting, I barely slept. Patricia's threats kept looping through my head, each one more absurd the longer I picked them apart. She had no authority to mandate structural inspections, yet she spoke as if she were judge, jury, and executioner of Willow Creek Estates. She was playing on ignorance, hoping no one in the neighborhood would question her. But ignorance was something I could dismantle. The next morning, I drove to the county municipal building downtown, a gray box of a structure that hummed with bureaucratic energy. People shuffled in and out, clutching permits, forms, and folders filled with architectural sketches. To anyone else, it might have looked like a maze of red tape. To me, it was familiar ground. I'd spent enough years drafting reports for this place to know exactly where to look. Inside the records office, I scanned shelves and computer terminals stacked with zoning maps, fire code amendments, and HOA and corporation files. The clerk barely glanced up when I requested Willow Creek Estate's safety inspection authority. She pointed me toward a terminal, muttering about how that HOA's been asking for exceptions for years. That caught my attention. Exceptions meant weakness. Weakness meant leverage. I typed in the association's incorporation number, fingers moving fast. Within minutes, I had my confirmation. Willow Creek Estate's HOA bylaws contain no clause granting authority for structural inspections of private residences. Their reach extended only to external appearance, paint colors, landscaping, visible modifications. Patricia's so-called safety inspections weren't just questionable, they were outright void. My pulse quickened as I leaned back in the stiff chair. She'd built her campaign of fear on nothing but smoke. And now, I had the proof. On my way out, I asked the clerk if the county had ever granted temporary inspection rights. She shook her head. Not for private garages. They'd need municipal partnership, and that's never happened for your subdivision. She said it so casually, like it was obvious. For me, it was ammunition. Driving home, I rehearsed how Patricia would react when confronted. She'd deny, deflect, maybe even double down. But facts were facts, and I had them locked down in black and white. My professional expertise had led me to the records, and the law backed me up. That combination was stronger than any clipboard she could wave around. When I pulled into Willow Creek, the neighborhood looked deceptively calm. Lawns watered, flags fluttering, kids biking down the cul-de-sac. Yet, under the surface, tension crackled. Word of the park meeting had spread. Some neighbors gave me nods of support as I passed. Others avoided my eyes, afraid of drawing Patricia's attention. Greg was standing at his mailbox as I parked. His posture was stiff, and he fumbled the same envelope twice before sliding it into the slot. He glanced at me, then quickly looked away, but not before I caught the worry carved into his features. He knew Patricia's threats were shaky. He knew what I carried could end her hold. Still, fear gripped him tighter than truth. Inside my house, I laid the printouts on the kitchen table. My father's motorcycle glinted in the corner of my mind, a reminder of why this mattered. Patricia wasn't just inventing power. She was trying to erase legacy under the guise of safety. My father's work, my skills, my rights, they were all being lumped into her false narrative of danger. I pressed my palm against the cool surface of the report. This was the turning point. Knowledge is leverage, and leverage dismantles tyranny. Patricia had overreached, and now I had the foundation to prove it. The fight was no longer about defending myself against her accusations. It was about exposing her entire campaign for what it was, a house of cards built on fabricated authority. And I intended to pull the first card. The county records lay spread across my kitchen table like blueprints for war. Each page was a nail in Patricia's coffin, proof that her inspection campaign had no legal spine. But proof alone wasn't enough. Patricia wouldn't fold just because she was wrong. She thrived on spectacle, on fear, on convincing others that resistance was futile. To win, I needed to bring these findings into the light in a way she couldn't control. That opportunity came faster than I expected. By evening, Patricia had called an urgent board session at the community clubhouse. The notice was shoved under every door, written in bold, authoritarian font. Attendance required. Immediate safety concerns. Her timing was perfect for intimidation. People would shuffle in after work, tired, vulnerable, unwilling to fight. She wanted them pliable. The clubhouse was a converted recreation hall, its vaulted ceiling echoing with nervous chatter when I arrived. Families filled folding chairs, their faces drawn with fatigue. Patricia stood at the front, clipboard in hand, already reveling in the authority of the microphone. Her words boomed off the walls. Our neighborhood is in crisis. Non-compliant structures threaten our insurance policies, our safety, and our property values. Immediate inspections will commence. Her gaze cut to me like a blade. Certain individuals have placed us all at risk by refusing to cooperate. The murmurs began, low and uncertain. I caught the eye of a neighbor I'd known for years. His brow furrowed, his arms crossed in doubt. Doubt was the first crack. I didn't wait for permission. Rising from my seat, I carried the county documents to the center aisle, the fluorescent lights washing everything in. Harsh clarity. "You've been lied to," I said, voice steady but loud enough to ride the echoes. "Your HOA has no authority to conduct structural inspections. None. These bylaws only cover appearance, paint, landscaping, visible changes. The county confirmed it this morning." Gasps rippled through the room. Patricia's face hardened, but her grip on the microphone betrayed her. Her knuckles whitened as she clutched it too tightly. "That's a gross misinterpretation," she snapped. "Our mandate includes community safety." "No," I cut in, holding the documents high. "Community safety belongs to the city inspector and the fire marshal, not to a board with a clipboard and an agenda. You've been threatened with fines and legal action that don't exist. That's not protection. It's extortion by fear." The tension in the room shifted, an invisible pendulum swinging away from her. People leaned forward, whispering urgently. Some faces lit with relief, others with anger. They'd been cornered for so long that the truth felt like fresh air. At the edge of the room, Greg sat behind a folding table stacked with minutes and agendas. He hadn't spoken, but his body betrayed him again. His leg bounced under the table, his pen tapping nervously against the surface. He avoided Patricia's eyes, staring instead at the documents in my hand. His lips pressed tight, jaw twitching as if fighting back words. He looked like a man drowning in silence, reaching for air but too afraid to inhale. Patricia tried to rally. "These claims are reckless. This man is twisting technicalities to undermine community safety." I let her words hang, then dropped the weight of my own. "I'm not twisting anything. I'm a licensed structural engineer. I know the codes, the laws, the standards, and I know when someone invents authority they don't have. Patricia, your power here is a facade, and tonight it cracks." The room buzzed with energy, like static before a storm. Neighbors whispered to each other, some already pulling out their phones, snapping photos of the documents I held. Patricia's eyes darted around, searching for allies, but the confidence she'd worn at the podium bled away with every murmur. Greg's hand finally stilled. He looked at me, eyes wide, conflicted but alive with something new. Recognition. He hadn't spoken yet, but his body told me enough. The truth was breaking through his fear, piece by piece. And when he chose to act, Patricia's entire foundation would collapse. I folded the documents carefully, sliding them back into their envelope. Tonight wasn't the final confrontation, but it was the moment the tide shifted. Patricia had declared war. Now she knew I had the weapons to fight it. The energy from the clubhouse meeting still buzzed through my veins long after I left. Patricia had tried to tighten her grip, but instead, the truth had loosened it. The neighbors had seen the bylaws, seen the county's confirmation, and most importantly, seen her falter. Still, I knew a cornered opponent doesn't retreat. They lash out. She'd come harder, and I had to be ready. The next morning, the setting shifted to neutral ground, the Willow Creek coffee shop. It was a place where the neighborhood's undercurrent flowed freely, where gossip mixed with espresso and complaints about HOA fees floated in the air like steam. I chose it deliberately because if Greg was going to crack, it wouldn't be under Patricia's shadow at the clubhouse. It had to be here, where walls didn't echo her commands. When I arrived, Greg was already there, sitting at a corner table. His posture was rigid, back too straight, hands wrapped tightly around a paper cup he hadn't sipped from. The folder he always carried rested on the table, unopened, as though he wasn't sure whether to guard it or throw it away. His eyes flicked toward the door every time someone came in, scanning for Patricia like a soldier checking the horizon for artillery fire. I slid into the seat across from him. He didn't speak. His fingers tapped the cardboard cup in an uneven rhythm, betraying the storm underneath. "You saw the records," I said, keeping my voice low but steady. "You know she's bluffing." "And you know it won't hold." Greg's shoulders tensed. He stared at the folder as if it were alive, as if opening it might unleash something he couldn't control. His lips parted, but no words came out. Instead, he pinched the bridge of his nose, eyes closing, the silent gesture of a man crushed between duty and fear. I didn't push with accusations. I offered what engineers know best: structure. "Greg, buildings collapse when the load exceeds design. Patricia's piling weight on a frame that can't bear it. You've seen it. You've felt it. How long before it snaps? And you're under the wreckage with her?" His eyes opened, and for the first time, he met mine. The conflict was written across his face like cracks spiderwebbing through concrete. His jaw clenched, throat bobbing as if he'd swallowed words that burned on the way down. Then he exhaled sharply, leaning back in his chair. His hands released the cup, but they shook as they fell to the table. "She's pushing us past the limit," he finally muttered, barely audible. "I've signed minutes I didn't agree with. She makes me record things that didn't happen, and if I don't, she threatens to smear me as negligent." His voice broke, eyes darting toward the window, as though he feared the glass might carry his confession back to her. It wasn't much, but it was enough. The conflicted witness had finally spoken, and his truth was a fuse waiting for ignition. I leaned forward. "Greg, this isn't just about me or my garage. It's about everyone. If she's falsifying board minutes, that's fraud. If she's threatening you, that's coercion. The county won't protect her when this comes. Out, but I can't prove it alone. I need you." His hands trembled as he reached for the folder, sliding it closer. For a moment, I thought he'd open it. Let me see everything inside. But fear won out again. He pulled it back, clutching it to his chest, eyes narrowing with regret. "Not yet," he whispered. I didn't press further. Reinforcement takes time, but his admission was a breakthrough, the kind that shifted the balance of weight. Patricia's authority had been hollow. Now I had proof it was rotten too. And Greg was the one who could expose it fully when the moment came. As I left the coffee shop, the cool morning air felt sharper, clearer. Patricia thought fear would hold this neighborhood in place forever. She never accounted for cracks widening, or for silence breaking under its own unbearable weight. Greg hadn't chosen sides yet, but his body, his voice, his trembling hands, they all told the same story. When the collapse came, he wouldn't be standing with her. The walk home from the coffee shop felt like pacing along a fault line. Every step hummed with the knowledge that pressure was building, cracks widening, collapse inevitable. Greg had confirmed what I suspected. Patricia's authority wasn't just inflated, it was corrupted, but suspicion and whispered confessions weren't enough. To dismantle her grip, I needed something undeniable, a plan that merged my professional expertise with undeniable evidence. The Community Recreation Center became my next stage. Its multi-purpose hall was a place I knew well from volunteer projects, a space where residents gathered for fitness classes, book drives, even holiday potlucks, neutral territory, the kind of place where people remembered what community was supposed to feel like. I reserved a slot under the guise of hosting a home safety seminar, leveraging my license and reputation to make it official. By evening, folding chairs filled with familiar faces, neighbors who'd been cowed into silence for too long. I stood at the front with a projector, blueprints flickering against the screen. It wasn't my garage I showed them first. It was theirs. Photos of neighborhood homes, annotated with code compliance notes and structural highlights. I kept it factual, clinical, grounded in expertise. Then I drew the line Patricia had crossed. Homeowner associations, I said, pointer tracing the bylaws on the screen, are empowered to regulate appearances, paint colors, landscaping, common areas. But structural safety belongs exclusively to municipal authorities. That's fire code, that's zoning law, that's insurance liability. And what's happening now? It's not regulation. It's overreach. Gasps and murmurs filled the room. Parents exchange looks, retirees lean forward with narrowed eyes. I saw doubt transform into anger, quiet into recognition. Patricia had convinced them compliance was survival. Now they saw compliance was submission to something. Hollow. I shifted slides, showing excerpts from the county records. Here's the incorporation clause. No structural authority granted. Here's the fire code amendment. Municipal jurisdiction only. And here's the county confirmation. Willow Creek Estates, HOA, has no inspection power. 0. The murmurs turned into a low rumble. People snapped photos with their phones, whispered in sharper tones. A mother in the front row clenched her jaw, muttering about the fines she had already paid. The tide was shifting, the current carrying people away from fear. But as I scanned the room, my eyes locked on Greg. He was in the back row, arms folded so tightly it looked painful, foot tapping a restless rhythm against the floor. His eyes never left the screen, but every flicker of expression betrayed him. Wincing when I said overreach, stiffening when I said fraud, pressing his lips together when neighbors muttered about corruption. He wanted to move, to act, but his body was locked in restraint. I closed the presentation with my father's motorcycle projected on the screen. This is what she calls a hazard, a memory, a piece of family legacy that carries no risk to anyone. If she can target me, she can target you. And unless we stand, she'll keep inventing rules until no one remembers where the line was. The room erupted into discussion. Neighbors leaned into each other, some furious, some energized, some already demanding a board vote. I stepped aside, letting the evidence do the work. Patricia wasn't here to smother the momentum. That absence mattered. Greg lingered after most had left, still rooted in his chair. His hand rubbed the back of his neck, his breathing shallow, eyes locked on the projection that was now just a blank blue screen. His struggle was written across him, every line of tension, every unspoken word. He'd confessed once in private. Now, surrounded by neighbors buzzing with new conviction, he teetered on the edge of saying it aloud, but he didn't. Not yet. He rose slowly, folder clutched under his arm, and slipped out into the night with shoulders hunched like a man carrying too much weight. I let him go. I didn't need to force his step. The ground beneath Patricia was already shifting. Greg's silence wouldn't hold much longer, and when he finally spoke, his words would land with the force of a building collapsing under its own corrupted design. The recreation center's echoes still rang in my ears as I walked back through the neighborhood that night. Porch lights flickered on. Kids' bikes leaned against driveways. Sprinklers ticked across lawns. On the surface, Willow Creek Estates looked the same. But under the quiet hum of suburbia, something had shifted. People had seen the truth, and once seen, it couldn't be unseen. The next morning, I took the fight into my own professional arena, the engineering firm where I kept an office downtown. My desk was cluttered with codebooks, safeties, ball manuals, and project binders, all of which became tools in what I was building. I wasn't just defending myself anymore. I was assembling a case strong enough to withstand Patricia's inevitable counterattack. I started with the county's bylaws, highlighting sections that stripped the HOA of any inspection authority. Then I overlaid state building codes, fire marshal jurisdiction, and insurance standards. One by one, I created a structural map, not of a building, but of Patricia's lies. Each line connected, each clause reinforced the next, until it formed something airtight. On my drafting board, I pinned photos from the recreation center meeting, residents with phones raised, neighbors leaning forward with recognition dawning in their eyes. Proof of impact. Patricia couldn't silence an entire crowd that had seen the evidence firsthand. Hours passed in focused silence, interrupted only by the scratch of my pen and the whir of the printer. I cross-referenced municipal ordinances, case precedents, even HOA arbitration outcomes from other counties. By mid-afternoon, I had a binder thicker than any violation notice Patricia had ever delivered. But more importantly, it wasn't just technical, it was visual. Charts, diagrams, and highlighted sections turned dry law into something anyone could understand. This was my counterplan. My father had taught me that strength isn't just in steel, it's in preparation. You reinforce before stress arrives, not after. Patricia was about to apply more stress than ever, and I was ready. While I worked, Greg appeared in my thoughts again. The way his foot had tapped at the recreation center, The way his shoulders hunched when neighbors buzzed with questions. The way his eyes lingered on the blank screen after everyone else had gone. He was torn apart inside, pulled between loyalty to truth and fear of retaliation. I knew that struggle, and I knew sooner or later it would break one way or the other. By evening, I returned home to find another notice taped to my front door. Patricia's handwriting was unmistakable, each letter sharp and slanted. Final warning, unauthorized structure subject to immediate penalty. I peeled it off slowly, the paper crumpling in my fist. The timing was deliberate. She wanted me rattled, weakened before the next board session. Instead, I set the binder on the garage workbench beside my father's motorcycle. The chrome caught the overhead light, gleaming like a silent witness. I ran a hand over the handlebars, feeling the grit of dust mixed with the smooth curve of metal. This bike wasn't just memory. It was resolve. Patricia could threaten me with every fine in her arsenal, but she couldn't erase this. That night, I assembled copies of my binder, sliding them into manila envelopes. One for the city inspector, one for the county clerk, one for the HOA board itself, and one for Greg, especially Greg. He might not have spoken yet, but when the time came, he'd need something solid to lean on, something stronger than fear. By midnight, the envelopes were stacked neatly by the door. My plan was ready. Patricia had escalated, but now so had I. The difference was that her threats floated on air, while my counterattack was built on concrete law and steel-hard fact. I glanced once more at the motorcycle, the reflection of the overhead light running along its frame. My father's voice echoed in memory. A structure only fails if you let weakness go unchecked. I wasn't letting anything fail. Not this house, not his legacy, not this fight. Tomorrow, the real execution of my strategy would begin. And Patricia would finally learn that fear crumbles when truth is reinforced. Morning broke with a heaviness that pressed against the walls of my house. The stack of envelopes sat by the door, silent and waiting. Today wasn't about preparation anymore. It was about execution. Patricia had called a special compliance session at the library's community hall, framing it as an emergency to finalize inspection protocols. Her urgency was a telltale sign. She knew the ground beneath her was cracking. The library was a space usually reserved for book fairs and quiet study groups, but tonight it pulsed with tension. Rows of chairs faced a long table where the HOA board sat under the fluorescent glare. Patricia occupied the center, posture rigid, smile stretched tight as piano wire. To her left and right, board members shifted uncomfortably, their stacks of papers looking flimsy compared to the binder I carried under my arm. Residents filled the seats, buzzing with speculation. Some clutched their most recent finds, others leaned together in whispered outrage. The mood was no longer passive, it was restless, waiting. Patricia called the meeting to order with a sharp tap of her pen. "We are here to finalize compliance procedures for structural hazards," she announced. "Effective immediately, inspections will begin, and penalties will follow for non-cooperation." Her words echoed, but the power behind them was weaker than before. I stood, binder in hand, and walked toward the front row. The scrape of my chair legs against the floor drew eyes in every direction. Patricia stiffened as I stopped just short of the board's table. "You don't have that power," I said, setting the binder down with a deliberate thud. The sound reverberated like a gavel. "This association has no standing for structural inspections. The county confirmed it. The fire code confirms it. Your own bylaws confirm it." Murmurs surged behind me. Neighbors craned their necks to catch a glimpse of the binder, whispers building like storm winds. Patricia's smile faltered, but she pressed forward. "Mr. Mercer? You've made these claims before, but tonight is about protecting our community. Safety is not negotiable." I opened the binder, flipping to the highlighted section of the HOA charter. Safety isn't negotiable, but lying about authority is. Page 6, Section 2. The association's jurisdiction extends solely to external appearance and communal property. No mention of structural inspections, no mandate, no authority. You've been fabricating threats to control compliance. The board members exchanged nervous glances. One cleared his throat but said nothing. Patricia's eyes narrowed, but the tightness around her mouth betrayed her. From the corner of the board's table, Greg sat hunched over the meeting minutes. His pen hovered in midair, frozen. His shoulders tensed, then slumped, then tensed again. He couldn't look at me, but he couldn't look at Patricia either. His foot tapped an erratic beat under the table, and his hand trembled slightly as he adjusted his glasses. His body screamed what his mouth refused. He knew the truth, and he was suffocating under the weight of recording her lies. I pulled another document from the binder, county confirmation stamped and signed. I held it up high, letting the residents see the seal glint under the light. This is the county clerk's statement. Willow Creek Estates HOA has never been granted structural inspection rights. Every fine, every threat, every violation notice tied to that claim is fraudulent. Gasps and angry mutters swept the hall. A woman in the second row whispered about the fines she'd paid for supposed garage hazards. A father muttered about repainting his shed under threat of structural penalties. Their anger was no longer quiet. It was collective. Patricia slammed her pen against the table. Enough! This meeting is not a courtroom. You have no authority to lecture this board. I met her glare, steady and unshaken. Authority isn't declared. It's proven, and tonight the proof isn't on your side. The hall erupted. Neighbors raised their voices, demanding answers, calling out the absurdity of Patricia's threats. The board members shifted uncomfortably, one even sliding his chair back an inch, as if distancing himself from her. Greg's pen finally dropped. He leaned back, face pale, lips pressed thin. His fingers tapped against the folder in front of him, hesitant but steadying with each beat. He still hadn't spoken, but the battle within him was visible to everyone now. As the meeting spiraled into open dissent, I closed the binder with finality. The strategy was in motion. Patricia had lost the silence of the crowd, and soon she'd lose the protection of the board itself. The library meeting had detonated like a controlled blast, shaking Patricia's carefully built facade until cracks spread through every row of residents. But tonight's confrontation would decide everything. She had called for a community emergency assembly in the high school gymnasium, no doubt hoping the larger space and echoing acoustics would restore her power. She miscalculated. A bigger stage only meant a bigger audience for her unraveling. When I arrived, the bleachers were already packed. Families sat shoulder to shoulder, whispers darting back and forth like sparks on dry tinder. At center court, a long table stood with microphones set for the board. Patricia sat at the middle again, her posture defiant, her eyes scanning the crowd with forced calm. She had dressed for authority, sharp suit, bold colors, but no outfit could disguise the tremor in her hands as she shuffled papers that meant nothing. I took my seat near the front, binder balanced on my lap. The noise of the gym pressed around me, squeaking shoes on polished wood, the hum of fluorescent lights, the low rumble of expectation. Tonight, truth wasn't confined to quiet offices or side conversations. Tonight, it would echo through rafters and banners that once bore the weight of championships. Patricia opened with the same bravado. Our neighborhood faces unprecedented risk. Non-compliant homeowners endanger us all. As your elected board, we are compelled to act swiftly. The crowd cut her off with murmurs, louder this time, restless and skeptical. Her eyes flicked nervously toward Greg, seated at the far end of the table with the meeting minutes. He was hunched forward, elbows on the table, pen rolling between his fingers in a constant loop. His shoulders tightened each time Patricia emphasized safety, his foot jittering under the table in rhythm with her words. His silence was fraying. I stood before she could launch into another monologue, my voice carried without the microphone, sharpened by the acoustics of the gym. You've heard this before, threats dressed as authority. But tonight, you'll hear the truth. I lifted the binder and walked to the center court, the sound of my footsteps amplifying through the space. Flipping it open, I angled it so the crowd could see the county seal. This is the record of our HOA's charter. No authority over private structures. None. Every notice you've been served, every fine you've paid tied to safety hazards in your garages or sheds, it was fabricated. The gym buzzed like a hive struck with a stick. People leaned forward, voices rising in disbelief, then anger. Patricia gripped her microphone. Mister, Mercer is twisting technicalities to undermine this board. Without inspections, we expose ourselves to lawsuits, skyrocketing insurance costs, even catastrophe I didn't wait for her to finish. Insurance doesn't collapse because a board invents power it doesn't have. It collapses because fraud and abuse go unchecked. And what's happening here is exactly that. I gestured to the rows of residents. You've all felt it. The endless fines, the threats of legal action that never came, the intimidation. That isn't protection. That's control. The murmurs sharpened into shouts. A man in the bleachers raised a violation slip, waving it like evidence. I paid $600 for a so-called inspection last year. You're telling me it was worthless? Others shouted agreement, their voices echoing off the gym walls until Patricia's microphone seemed powerless. At the board's table, Greg froze. His pen dropped, clattering across the wood. He pressed both hands flat against the table, knuckles white, breathing heavy. His eyes darted between me and Patricia, torn but no longer invisible. His shoulders rose and fell with quick breaths, as though the weight of every falsified minute and coerced silence was crashing down at once. Finally, he stood. The crowd fell into a tense hush, sensing the shift. His voice trembled at first, but the words gained strength as they left his mouth. "It's true," he said, looking out at the residents. "I've been pressured to record minutes that never happened, threatened if I didn't sign off. Patricia told me to call structural issues hazards even when they weren't. She's been lying to all of us." The silence broke into an uproar, gasps, shouts, furious demands. Patricia's face drained of color as Greg's confession hung in the air like a verdict. He sank back into his chair, head bowed, hands trembling, but his body was lighter, as though truth had finally released him. I closed the binder with finality. The foundation of her authority is gone. Tonight, it collapses. The crowd erupted, no longer whispers but a chorus of voices demanding Patricia's removal, her resignation, her accountability. The gym shook with their anger and their relief. For the first time, Patricia sat silent, cornered not by me alone, but by the weight of an entire community. The uproar in the high school gym didn't fade when the board adjourned. Neighbors spilled into the parking lot in clusters, voices sharp with anger and relief. Patricia left through a side door, her heels striking the pavement with brittle speed, but her silence said more than any speech she'd delivered. The authority she had clung to was shattered, exposed under the glare of her own lies. The following week, the county chambers became the final stage. Rows of chairs filled with residents, their expressions tighter now, sharpened into resolve. No longer whispering, no longer glancing nervously over shoulders. They were ready to confront her in the open. At the front of the chamber, city officials sat with clipboards and microphones, waiting to hear testimony. Patricia and her lawyer occupied one side of the room, while I carried the binder to the other, my steps steady under the weight of legacy and law. Greg was there too, seated near the back. His posture was fragile but honest, no longer hunched in concealment, no longer trembling in silence. His hands rested flat on his knees, fingers tapping faintly against the fabric, as if keeping rhythm with the courage he'd finally found. He wasn't at ease, but he was free of the suffocating tension that once bent his shoulders inward. His silence had become testimony already, and soon his words would follow. The hearing began with the dry formality of official proceedings. A clerk read out the accusations, the bylaws, the complaints. Patricia's lawyer spoke first, weaving phrases about misinterpretations and proactive safety measures. But each line wilted under the documents I had submitted days earlier. County records, legal codes, signed confirmations. When I rose to speak, I didn't just rely on words. I relied on the foundation I had built. Willow Creek Estates, HOA, I said into the microphone, has no authority to mandate structural inspections. Not in their charter, not in county amendments, not under state fire code. Every fine, every penalty levied under those claims was baseless. Residents were coerced, records were falsified, and the damage wasn't financial alone. It was communal trust, eroded by intimidation. The chamber stirred, residents nodding, murmuring in agreement. I laid my hand on the binder, then gestured toward the crowd. This community deserves better than governance through fear. My father built the home I now protect. I restored his motorcycle with my own hands. Patricia tried to label that legacy as a hazard, but tonight, it stands not as clutter, but as proof that what we build, we also defend. Officials listened intently, scribbling notes, exchanging glances. Then came Greg. He stood slowly, every eye in the room turning toward him. His hand trembled as he gripped the back of his chair, but he didn't sit back down. His voice cracked at first, but he steadied himself with a breath. I was told to write false minutes. I was told to label private property as hazardous when I knew it wasn't. I was threatened with removal, even public shaming if I refused. And I couldn't live with it anymore. What Daniel showed you is true. His words fell like hammers, each one striking the structure Patricia had clung to. Her lawyer shifted uncomfortably, whispering urgently into her ear. But Patricia stared straight ahead, face drained, lips pressed so tight they were almost bloodless. The officials conferred, their decision swift. The master key system would be removed at the HOA's expense. All fines tied to fabricated hazards would be refunded. Patricia was ordered to step down from her position immediately, pending investigation into fraudulent practices. The chamber erupted, not with chaos this time, but with relief. I walked out into the sunlight with neighbors at my side. Some clapped me on the back, others simply nodded with gratitude. The air felt lighter, as though a weight had lifted from every home in Willow Creek. In the distance, the steeple of the community center caught the sun, gleaming like a reminder that strength isn't found in threats, but in truth, reinforced by courage. At home, I opened the garage. My father's motorcycle stood waiting, polished chrome catching the light. It wasn't just steel, it was memory, resilience, defiance. Patricia had tried to erase it, but now it stood as the symbol of everything we'd reclaimed. If you want more stories of homeowners standing up to HOA tyranny, hit subscribe right now, share your story in the comments, and let me know where you're watching from.